Let's jump right into this explainer on the conscious collaboration framework and the Phoenix ecosystem. It's an absolutely fascinating blueprint for systemic change. Look, we all know we live in a world facing some pretty heavy, overlapping crises. Ecological instability, social fragmentation, institutional mistrust, you name it. But what if the solution wasn't just another isolated app or some top-down policy? What if the solution was a fundamental upgrade to human collaboration itself? That is exactly what we're going to unpack today.
Think about this for a second. What if we challenged ourselves to view love and care not just as warm and fuzzy buzzwords, but as concrete, governed utilities that can actually support humanity? The source material refers to this concept as love as infrastructure. It proposes that for our systems to truly serve life, things like human dignity, boundary setting, accountability, and repair need to be hardwired right into how our institutions and technologies operate. It's a completely different paradigm for building our future, and honestly, it's a real game changer.
To make sense of all this without getting lost in the weeds, we're going to follow a really clear, logical path today. First, love as systemic infrastructure. Then, building radical trust, education and adaptive learning, relationship-aware AI support, and finally, piloting islands of coherence.
All right, kicking things off with part one, love as systemic infrastructure, the true foundation of change.
So before we even think about touching technology or city planning, we have to start at the bedrock layer, which is human operating capacity. Now, self-sovereignty in this context isn't about isolation or being a lone wolf. It's the absolute foundation needed to keep us from collapsing into fear-driven reactivity when things get tense. True self-sovereignty means having the emotional maturity and discernment to participate in complex systems without losing your footing. And when you pair that sovereignty with love, it becomes mature participation. It allows us to face community challenges head-on without instantly collapsing into blame or tribalism. Moving right along to part two, building radical trust through small group dynamics. So you might be wondering, how do we connect these sovereign individuals? Well, we form the relational glue of the system through what's called radical trust. But let's be clear. Radical trust is not blind trust. Just demanding that people instantly trust each other, yeah, that never works. Instead, it's a highly disciplined practice of keeping agreements, honoring consent, and normalizing repair. The framework introduces these small groups called coherent cells. Inside these cells, people intentionally build trust through patient listening and reliable follow-through. When conflict inevitably happens, they don't see it as a failure. They see it as a trigger to engage in a structured repair process. But here's a massive reality check. Not all collaboration is actually good. You can have a highly coherent, highly collaborative group that is totally united by fear, propaganda, or mob conformity. The framework calls that destructive coherence. What conscious collaboration specifically aims for is regenerative coherence, a life-serving alignment that is deeply grounded in wise governance, inclusion, and ecological resonance. We need clear language and definitions to act as the guardrails to keep groups strictly on this regenerative path.
Okay, part three, education and adaptive learning. This is all about scaling to the community level.
So you've got these small, trusting, coherent cells. Now what? They need structured pathways to scale that action up. This sequence neatly systemizes that exact journey. First, CERF A is all about civic sense-making, basically understanding local values and identifying missing voices before rushing into action. Then, CERF B takes that understanding and activates actual, governed projects. Meanwhile, EmpowerED ensures that the folks involved are constantly growing their leadership and livelihood skills. And finally, Pulse is the adaptive learning layer, capturing feedback and living metrics so the community actually learns from what it's doing. It all locks together like a giant puzzle. Which brings us to part four, relationship-aware AI support, the enabling technology. Notice how we're only just now bringing in the tech? Only after the human educational foundation is rock solid do we introduce the Phoenix platform. The way the technology is framed here as a coherence mirror rather than an automated boss is super important. The system being designed here is called relationship-aware AI. It doesn't tell people what to do, it certainly doesn't rank their moral worth, and it absolutely doesn't force automated matches. Instead, it just helps human facilitators summarize complex meetings, track commitments, and spot missing voices, all while keeping humans entirely in the driver's seat. We're so used to technology acting as a control mechanism, right? Platforms that pressure us, harvest our data, and push addictive algorithms that completely compress our lived reality. The Phoenix platform's synergy engine takes the exact opposite approach. It acts strictly as scaffolding. It invites participation, surfaces options for humans to review, and carefully preserves the context of local relationships. It's an ethical coordination intelligence, not a tool for extractive capture.
And to actually make that work, the platform relies on some absolutely non-negotiable data dignity safeguards. Every single AI summary remains a draft until a real human reviews it. There are transparent pathways to correct the record, and visibility of any information is totally dependent on the explicit consent of the people involved. It is quite literally a fascinating blueprint for a post-surveillance pro-human technology infrastructure.
Finally, Part 5, Piloting Islands of Coherence. Let's look at the geographic rollout. Let's zoom out to the big picture here. The ultimate goal is to deploy these ecosystems to convert fragmented, struggling neighborhoods into highly functional, locally servant communities. An island of coherence isn't some isolated sci-fi utopia. It's a real-world, physical location where schools, businesses, public agencies, and residents are actively practicing radical trust, using those CERF and Pulse workflows, and leveraging the Phoenix platform to actually coordinate regenerative projects. It's about creating a pocket of healthier order that can naturally spread over time. And we are seeing this play out right now. The sources detail a really ambitious concurrent 3-city pilot strategy, proving that this ecosystem can adapt to vastly different complexities. You've got Santa Barbara acting as the proof of coherence lab, deeply tied to university and community learning. Then there's Chicago, which serves as a serious stress test for metropolitan complexity and environmental justice. And Seattle is testing the model through the lens of bioregional and ecological stewardship. They all share the same learning architecture, but each location preserves its total local sovereignty. Now, you literally can't just drop a massive tech platform on a city and say, good luck. You need a paced roadmap so communities aren't overwhelmed. This 90-day pilot timeline does exactly that. You spend the first couple of weeks just confirming local stewards and getting consent. Then you form those small, coherent cells and map out the field. By day 60, the community selects a visible win, a highly feasible, meaningful action that proves the collaboration actually works. And finally, you execute the project and harvest the learning for the next cycle. It's paced perfectly for how humans actually process change. So, bringing it all full circle, this statement right here drives home the central thesis of the whole explainer. Technology is merely the scaffolding for human connection. Everything we've explored today, from the disciplined practice of self-sovereignty to the CERF workflows to the ethical data safeguards of the synergy engine, it all exists for one simple reason: to help human beings relate more truthfully, coordinate more intelligently, and act more regeneratively. Which leaves us with a pretty big question to ponder. As these islands of coherence start forming around the globe, how will you choose to show up? Because conscious collaboration isn't just a high-level theory for massive city pilots. It starts right now with the agreements you make, the trust you build, and the repair you normalize in your own life. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope you take these ideas straight into your own communities.